I grew up reading the Greek myths. In elementary school, I read all about the Titans and the Olympians and all the demigods. I began reading the Iliad and the Odyssey while in junior high. At the same time, I got into the Lord of the Rings. Then there was Hollywood. Jason and the Argonauts was burned into my brain thanks to Ray Harryhausen's stop-motion animation. Reading the events in the Iliad and in the Odyssey, there was a dissonance between the horror on the page and the G-rated movies I watched with my dad. A few months ago, while watching Project Hail Mary, I wondered what that film would have been if Christopher Nolan had directed it. Well, it would have been epic. I know that for a fact. It would have probably lost the intimacy that Lord and Miller brought to the screen. Knowing that Nolan was running the show, I expected nothing less than something amazing. So, while there's been an epic amount of online discourse surrounding Nolan's version of Homer's The Odyssey, leading up to its release, there's a lot of noise focused on things like modern dialogue, costume choices, or casting controversies. But now that I've actually sat down and experienced this massive, almost 3-hour film, I want to strip all that away and talk about what this movie actually is. Because underneath the IMAX spectacle and the sprawling cast, Christopher Nolan has given us a profound anti-war statement that doubles as his first true foray into the horror genre. Now, Christopher Nolan serves as both the director and screenwriter for The Odyssey, and this may be one of the most natural combinations of filmmaker and story in his career. Now, the film stars Matt Damon, Tom Holland, Anne Hathaway, Robert Pattinson, Lupita Nyong'o, Zendaya, and Charlize Theron. The cinematographer was Hoyt van Hoytema, and Ludwig Göransson composed the score. Now, The Odyssey runs around 172 minutes, 2 hours, 52 minutes, which compared to the 20 years that The Odyssey took to get home, it's a small amount of time to be thoroughly amazed. So don't forget the Run P app. Nolan has always been interested in time, memory, obsession, identity, and men separated from the people they love. Memento explored a man who could no longer trust his own memory. Inception followed a father trapped away from his kids. Interstellar set another father across space and time with the hope of returning to his family. Dunkirk reduced an entire war story to one desperate goal: getting home. Each one of those films I've seen a multitude of times because those stories speak to us, and me. And now Nolan has Odysseus, perhaps the most original version of that character. Odysseus has survived the Trojan War, but winning the war does not mean his struggle is over. His journey home becomes a test of his intelligence, his loyalty, his pride, and even his identity. He can outthink monsters, deceive his enemies, and survive situations that kill the men around him. But many of his problems also come from the same qualities that make him heroic. His confidence becomes arrogance, his curiosity becomes reckless, and his need to prove that he is the smartest person in the room often brings punishment down on everyone traveling with him. Now, that tension fits Nolan perfectly. His protagonists are rarely simple heroes. They are driven men whose greatest strengths are connected to their deepest flaws. The Odyssey also gives Nolan the chance to work on a physical scale, larger than anything he has attempted before. Now, this is the first theatrical feature filmed entirely with IMAX film cameras. But the size of the production may not be the most important part of the approach. At its center, this is still a story of a man trying to return to his wife, his son, his home, and the person he believes he used to be. The real question may not be whether Odysseus can get home. It may be whether the man who returns can still belong there. Hey, we look at fantasy, horror, action, adventure, pop culture, and all things geek. I'm Rob, and this is A Constantly Racing Mind, where every frame tells a story. This is a non-spoiler review, so very light spoilers unless the book's been around for 3,000 years. Whenever a massive remake or reimagining is announced, the internet tends to groan. We retell a 3,000-year-old poem that we've already seen adapted, but maybe the constant retelling of stories isn't a bug. It's a feature of human culture. We remake films because new generations need to see themselves in the story, and we reimagine these ancient narratives because we are constantly trying to understand them from a new angle. Now, by adapting the Odyssey, Nolan is participating in the philosophical concept of the eternal return. He acknowledges that these fundamental human struggles have occurred before and will reoccur, but this time we are seeing them differently. He isn't trapped in the cycle of just remaking an old sword and sandal epic. He is actively in conversation with it, adding something entirely new to the lore. So, if you look closely, the Odyssey operates perfectly as a thematic and spiritual sequel to Nolan's last film, Oppenheimer. Both movies are fundamentally about men who are forced to deal with the heavy, world-altering consequences of the creations they unleash to the end of war. Instead of playing Odysseus as a triumphant action hero returning from battle, Matt Damon portrays him as a man adrift, stricken by the horrors of what he has wrought. His brilliant invention, the Trojan horse, may have won the war for the Greeks, but Nolan asked the question, to what end? The film is an incredibly emotional anti-war story that confronts the grief and PTSD of his protagonist. Nolan acknowledges the grandeur of the battlefield glory, but firmly emphasizes the horrific sacrifices the toll the war takes on humanity. This is brought to a brilliant, harrowing peak during Odysseus' journey to the underworld, where he is forced to look upon the men who died under his command over the past 20 years because of his machinations. And the other thing that completely caught me off guard is that Nolan essentially snuck a horror movie into a summer blockbuster. I have to admit, I found that there are sequences in this film that are straight up unapologetic horror, which matches the stories of the book and not the G-rated Hollywood of my youth. Nolan grounds the mythological elements to make them feel viscerally terrifying, and two sequences in particular steal the show. Now, the story is over 3,000 years old, so I'll call this a light spoiler. First is the Cyclops encounter. Instead of a typical fantasy action scene, Nolan leans into pure survival horror and existential dread. The grotesquely designed beast goes about his day-to-day business, mindlessly crushing and eating Odysseus' men as if they were insignificant ants. It's an absolute nightmare fuel that will make you feel like a kid afraid of the monster under the bed again. But it gets crazier. Later in the film, the crew runs into the witch, Circe, played brilliantly by Samantha Morton. Rather than treating the scene like a standard magic, Nolan turns it into a terrifying body horror sequence. You watch it in horror as Circe physically morphs and sculpts the soldiers into pigs with bare hands, utilizing what looks like Rick Baker-style practical effects. It's skin-crawling, mesmerizing sequence that completely elevates the film's terrifying tone. Now, behind the scene, you can see that the crew is working at its absolute top of their game to make this world feel tangible. Cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytma shot the entire film on IMAX cameras. The lengths this crew went to are unbelievable. They actually had to build custom heavy insulation blimp over the noisy IMAX cameras. The motor's just, too loud. Just so they could capture dialogue on the set without the machinery drowning the actors out. They shot practically on real mountains and oceans, meaning there are no blurry green screen fuzz killing your immersion. When Odysseus' men are caught in the ocean storm at night, it's pitch black, lit almost entirely by lanterns and on-set strobe lighting. We also have to talk about Ludwig Göransson's score. Göransson recently worked on The Mandalorian and Grogu. Once again, he stripped away the traditional orchestra and utilized a lot of ancient strings and instruments and heavy percussive synths. It's haunting, bass-heavy score that literally shakes the theater. Add in the incredibly efficient pacing by editor Jennifer Lame and the gorgeous detail sets from production designer Ruth De Jong, and you have a massive technical triumph. So let's go ahead and talk about the two biggest technical complaints floating around the internet right now. The sound mix and the lighting. If you are a Nolan fan, you already know what you're signing up for with the audio. Yes, the dialogue can sometimes get buried under the massive house shaking and sound effects and Ludwig Göransson's booming bass-heavy score. The movie is unapologetically concert loud. But honestly, that overwhelming volume may not work for everybody. My wife, for example. But it does, I think, in the movie's favor. When the Cyclops screams in the cave, it's definitely loud, drowning out everything else and adding to the pure nightmare fuel. It puts you right in the existential panic of the characters. Then there's the lighting. Some may think that the film looks too dark, muted, or drab compared to a traditional, colorful sword and sandal epic. I'm thinking Gladiator. But that isn't the flat, muddy, lifeless darkness we see a lot in modern CGI blockbusters. Nolan's committed to practical filmmaking means that the characters are caught in a massive ocean storm at night. It actually looks pitch black. The sequence is lit almost entirely by lanterns and on-set strobe lighting. It creates a world of deep shadows and stark contrast that grounds the mythology in a reality and makes the scary moments feel tangibly real. Now, I can't talk about a film of this scale without diving into the performances, because the ensemble Christopher Nolan has assembled here is working at absolute top of their game with some caveats. So let's start with our lead. I have to give Matt Damon his props here, because he delivers what might be one of the best performances of his career. Yes, even better than Jason Bourne. He anchors this massive epic perfectly by playing Odysseus as the anti-Oppenheimer. Instead of the whole movie circling around him, he acts as the stoic, PTSD-stricken center, while the epic events circle around him. I genuinely forgot I was watching Matt Damon. He completely transforms into the haunted warrior. Meanwhile, back in Ithaca, Tom Holland and Anne Hathaway hold down the emotional fort. Holland plays Odysseus' son, Telemachus, and this is easily his most mature adult performance outside of the Spider-Man franchise. At this point in his career, you can now deeply feel his frustration as a son missing a father he never knew, even if it's agonizing to watch him struggle with his inability to stop the men taking over his home. And Anne Hathaway is phenomenal as Penelope, bringing a fierce intensity and viciousness to the screen. She has standout moments that will literally stop the theater dead. Now, speaking of the men trying to take over their home, Robert Pattinson plays the lead suitor, Antinius, and he is a sniveling, draft-dodging snake. He fully leans into the villainy, chewing the scenery every time he's on screen. He also gets a quiet, powerful, supporting performance from Zendaya as the goddess Athena, who carries an incredible wisdom and authority in her limited screen time. But if there is one surprise standout that's completely won me over, it's John Leguizamo as Odysseus' blind, loyal servant, Eumaeus. I'm not kidding when I say he's the most unexpected emotional heart and core of the entire 3-hour movie. It's some of the best work of his entire career, and he genuinely deserves an Oscar nomination for it. Now here's my caveat. Anytime there's an all-star cast, I have a tendency to make film connections. Oh, there's so-and-so, and there's blah blah, or in this case, did Tom Holland and Zendaya really have a secret wedding? It could be distracting, well, at least for me. It sent my brain into connecting the cast mode. Finally, I have to briefly address the so-called controversial casting that the internet has been whining about for months. If you're mad about Elliot Page, Lupita Nyong'o, or Travis Scott being in this movie, I have news for you. They have maybe 5 to 10 minutes combined screen time in all 3-hour films, and personally, I don't care. The outrage is entirely overblown. Elliot Page is not playing Achilles, as the internet rumors claimed. He is playing a young soldier named Sinon, and he actually helps tie the emotional ending of the film together perfectly. Lupita Nyong'o brings great texture to her brief scenes as Helen of Troy, and Travis Scott plays a bard, which is actually a brilliant nod from Nolan to the fact that Homer's original poem was passed down through oral tradition. Every single one of them served their roles perfectly, and they're not distracting in the slightest. And like I said, who cares? Hey, there are no mid or post-credit scenes, so when the credits roll, you can take off, go have dinner, or better yet, come back here and let me know what you think. So let's take a quick peek at what the critics are saying before I give my final thoughts. The early critical response to the Odyssey is extremely strong. The film currently holds a 96% score on Rotten Tomatoes from 278 reviews. The popcorn meter is reading at 96% as well. Metacritic has a score of 89 out of 100 from 57 critics, placing the film in its universal acclaim category. However, the user score is only 2.6, which is generally unfavorable. Now, critics are praising Hoyte van Hoyteme's IMAX cinematography, Ludwig Göransson's score, the physical scale of the production, and, of course, Matt Damon's performance as Odysseus. The main criticisms involve the film's nearly 3-hour runtime, some emotional distance, modernized dialogue, and Nolan's changes to parts of Homer's mythology. First off, this is not a documentary. I never expected one. One of the things we talk about on this channel is stories, why we tell them, and more importantly, why we retell them. I've done several videos discussing why, when we watch movies, especially those that are adaptations of books or previous films, they always seem not to be what we remember. We tell stories that we hope will resonate with today's audience. That means each retelling adds or subtracts or just changes things. Whether that appeals to you is your choice. I believe I got over that some time ago. Stephen King mentions that his films and his books are two different mediums that try to tell a story. Sometimes he hated the film, and others he wished he had written the story as the filmmaker had rewritten it. My favorite book is Dune. I lived with that story for a very, very, very long time. And honestly, no film adaptation has ever met my mental headcanon. If you care about what the late Bronze Age was about, read a history book. If you want a mythic, fantasy, horror, action, and adventure story, this is it. Just be aware that some may think it may be a little dark for some, a little too loud for some others, but for me, this film checked all the boxes. I saw this film twice on Thursday, back-to-back screenings. Not once was I bored, and not once did I have issues with the sound. I enjoyed Göransson's score as it served the film and did not overpower the scenes. Reminds me of Bear McCreary's Battlestar Galactica with no orchestral score. I love the film, I love the acting, and the way Nolan told the story. A modern retelling that doesn't get bogged down in ancient paradigms. So I'm giving this film a 5 out of 5. At the end of the day, the Odyssey is a movie that makes you feel something deeply human. If you can look past the internet controversies, you will find a beautifully crafted film about pain, loss, and survival. People like stories. We retell them because we need to see ourselves in these stories. Like me, the ultimate adaptation resides in my head. Merch link in the description. For a movie this long, get the RunP app. You will need it for those important bio breaks and not want to miss any of the action in this film. So if you're into sci-fi, horror, action, adventure, prop culture, and all things geek, you are in the right place. This is a constantly racing mind. Until next time, take care.